Welcome to the Pittsburgh Conversation on Board Diversity. Thank you all for being patient with us. I'm Amy Coles, co-chair of this event, along with my blank room partners and dear friends, Jamie Butcher and Masha Trainer. We very much appreciate your joining us this evening and feel confident that you will find our program valuable and that the time will be well spent.
50/50 Women on Boards is an education and advocacy campaign committed to achieving gender balance on corporate boards. It's a campaign that especially resonates with us as we strive to inspire and courageous actions in others so they can lead impactful lives.
Masha, Jamie, and I thank our Pittsburgh leadership team for their steadfast partnership. Their efforts ensured the success of this event. Renee Kavilovich, Robert Morris University. Maya Moore-Eric, the Eric Group. Merrill Private Wealth Management. Michelle Keating, Kennemetal. Diane Lazaris, Wesco. Janet Lee, ANSYS. Erin McDowell, Range Resources. Mary Richter, Schneider Downs. Joanna Rodriguez, Wabtec Corporation. Casey Ryan, Reed Smith. Joanne Schwendinger, 26 Incorporated. Diana Toman, Arconic, and Claire Montgomery Zangerly, Allegheny Health Network.
This amazing team brought together an impressive group of local corporate sponsors. We are grateful for their generous support. ANSYS Inc., Blank Rome, Buchanan Ingersoll, Howmet Aerospace Limited, 26 Incorporated, Jones Day, Kennemetal, Reed Smith, Schneider Downs, and Wabtec Corporation.
Thank you all for your incredible collaboration and engagement on this important campaign to increase representation of women and people of color on corporate boards. Your efforts and sponsorship are essential to underwriting the research, education, and advocacy that are the mission of 50/50 Women on Boards. We would also like to thank our global sponsors of 50/50 Women on Boards, BNY Mellon, EY, Bank of America, McKinsey & Company, Marsh, and Equilar. It is now my pleasure to introduce Betsy Berkemer-Creder, CEO of 50/50 Women on Boards. She's going to talk about just how far we've come. She's the visionary who created and launched this international organization. Betsy, we are inspired by your vision and leadership.
Thank you, Amy, Jamie, and Masha. So delighted to be here in Pittsburgh. Actually, I'm based in Los Angeles, but I love Pittsburgh. In fact, I fell in love with a man there once. If I had married him, I'd still be in Pittsburgh. But unfortunately, he didn't see the beauty, I guess. But I saw the beauty in Pittsburgh. At any rate, I'm delighted to be here. And I wanted to share with you that we are all moving in the right direction. Our goal is to reach 50% of all board seats held by women and 20% of all board seats held by women of color. So we're making good progress, and we are here in Pittsburgh, one of 30 events that 50/50 Women on Boards has staged just over the last 3 weeks in November. So we are ecstatic about the progress that we're making in all these cities. And we've had nearly 6,000 registrants worldwide, including our brand new international cities, Toronto and Athens, Greece this year. And of course, we've been in London and Madrid and Mexico City for several years. So, and 25 US cities, including Pittsburgh, of course. And we're so glad to be here. So I'd like to share with you slides of where we are nationwide and where we are in Pennsylvania. Quarterly and annually, 50/50 Women on Boards uses the data provided by our partner Equilar to release our Gender Diversity Index report. And that's where we analyze the percentage of women on boards nationwide by state and by industry sector. We also report on the percentage of women selected for new board seats. And based on those who self-identify, we report on the race and ethnicity of all directors. By the way, you can see our entire GDI, Gender Diversity Index report, and our directory of companies on our website, which is 5050wob.com. So let's look at the year-over-year progress in the U.S. and in Pennsylvania. So nationwide, as you're seeing this fantastic slide, notice the bottom bar, which is the red bar. That's 25.6% of all board seats in the Russell 3000, not just the Fortune 1000 or the S&P 1500, but 3,000 companies in the Russell 3000. 25% of those seats are now held by women, which is a 3-point increase over last year when it was 22.6%. And that is the greatest increase we've had in year over year since over the last 5 years. And this is higher than ever in history, women and men in the audience, that we've reached 25.6%, but it's only halfway to our goal of 50%. So let's look at the statistics in Pennsylvania. As you'll see, the bottom bar also is moving in the right direction. Not quite at the national level yet, but making good progress in Pennsylvania. The percentage of board seats held by women is now 22.8, which is almost 23%. That's only 2 percentage points below the national level, but significantly higher by 2 points than last year. So, and what we look at, of course, is of the total directors in Pennsylvania in the Russell 3000 companies, 1,237 total directors last year, but 1,144 this year. And then of the 1,144, 261 seats are held by women, but really making good progress in Pennsylvania. And then how do companies stand up in their rankings? We measure companies at gender balance, which is 50-50, or we also recognize companies at who have 3+ or 3 or more, at least 3 women on their corporate boards, 2, 1, and of course the unwanted statistic of 0 women on their boards. But we're really, really pleased to share with you that for the first time ever this year, companies nationwide have 7% of the companies nationwide in the Russell 3000 have reached gender balance. So that shows it can be done. It's not an outlandish goal by any means. But the second bar is also critically important because the number of companies with 3 or more women on their boards has greatly increased to 34%, as you can see, over 26% last year. And then at the very bottom, of course, the companies we want to see this number diminishing. The companies last year at 7% that had no women on the boards nationwide, now down to 4%. So we're really pleased with that progress. And in Pennsylvania, the companies, 6 out of the 122 companies in the Russell 3000 that are located in Pennsylvania are gender balanced, 5%, moving up from 4% last year. And again, the numbers of companies with 3 or more women have significantly increased to 30% of the 122 companies. Increased from 24% last year. And the dreaded number at the bottom, 4% of companies in Pennsylvania still have no women on their boards. So I think you women in the audience need to start networking with those companies, also the ones that have just 1 or 2 women on their boards. So how many women will it take in Pennsylvania to become gender balanced, where all companies have the 50% women as well as 50% men? That range is from 279 to 503 directors. And that means that the lower number is based on the boards where a woman would replace a man in order to be brought onto the board, or the higher number is where a woman would be added to the board, which is what most companies are doing, are adding seats for women. And it would take 503 seats added in order to have gender balance in all the Russell 3000 companies in Pennsylvania. Now, on the next 2 slides, and those are the final slides, we do track the numbers of women and men of color, but we can only do that when the corporate directors self-identify their racial or ethnic background. And as a result of just beginning this tracking, you'll see that the numbers are very low. Only 17% of all directors have reported their ethnic or racial background, and of those, it shows that 12% of all directors are people of color, and that's 7% men of color and 4% women of color, rounded up. The next slide, you'll see how dramatically low this is as we've broken down the African American, Middle Eastern, Asian, Indigenous, Hispanic, and non-reported or Caucasian is the gray column. But the numbers of minority board directors now are extremely low. So with our education programs and your influence and boards now reaching out beyond their immediate circles of contact, we're going to increase these numbers. And for those of you who do serve on boards, please fill out your board profile on Equilar's Board Edge online and identify your race and ethnic background, even if you're Caucasian, so that we can track these numbers and help develop solutions for this situation. We want women to achieve 20% numbers of all board seats, and whenever we can make that happen. Women of color will hold 20%, and women in general will hold 50% of the board seats. So want to thank you all for having us here today, and you're going to learn a lot. We have a terrific panel, and I'd like to turn the microphone back over to Amy and Jamie. Thank you.
Thanks, Betsy. We heard the national average and the Pennsylvania average as well, but you'll be pleased to know that Pittsburgh companies have made progress as well. There's more to accomplish, and achieving gender-balanced boards is the goal.
It is now my honor to introduce our host for this evening, our great friend and colleague, Joanne Schwendinger. Joanne is the Executive Vice President, Chief Legal and Compliance Officer, and Corporate Secretary at 26 Incorporated. She's also the immediate past chair of the Global Board of the Association of Corporate Counsel and a longstanding member of the advisory board of the University of Pittsburgh School of Law's Center for International Legal Education. Joanne, thank you for being here with us and bringing your invaluable perspective to us.
Thank you, Amy, Jamie, and Masha, and hello to everyone. It's wonderful to be here, and I'm so honored to introduce this esteemed VIP panel. Steve Klemish is the leader of EY America's Center for Board Matters. Steve also serves on the boards of Robert Morris University and the United Way of Allegheny County. Sandra Beach-Len is the former president and CEO of Cali Solar Inc. Sandy is a former director of Wesco and currently serves on the corporate boards of American Electric Power, Avient, Trenzio, Interface Biologics, and Ripple Therapeutics. Mark Pelaez is a retired Rear Admiral in the U.S. Navy, and Mark serves as the lead independent director of 26 Incorporated. And Barbara Polk. Barbara is the Chief Administrative Officer of the John F. Kennedy Center for the Performing Arts, and she currently serves on the boards of Hershey Entertainment and Resorts and the Lupus Foundation of America. Thank you to each of you for being with us today. There are four major themes that we'd like to explore with you together today. The first is leading the way. What are we already doing in terms of leadership that works? Second, we often hear that networking is essential. How do we do that with purpose? Third, how do we articulate our own value proposition? And fourth, we would like to hear from you on expanding perspectives in light of the increased focus on ESG and human capital management. So let's get started. And as I ask you a question, I encourage all of you to feel free to jump in and make this a real Pittsburgh conversation. So let's get started with leading the way. And Sandy, if I could turn to you as co-chair of the Paradigm for Parity Coalition, what actions do you see that will accelerate gender parity in the boardroom?
The biggest single action that will make a difference will be continuing to fill the pipeline with highly talented, highly qualified women. The Paradigm for Parity that you mentioned is all about gaining commitments by corporations to create gender parity in their leadership levels. And we've got 138 companies that have made that commitment, utilizing a 5-step action plan that we have. But by continuing to develop and promote women to reach gender parity, we have this tremendous opportunity to have more women in the pipeline to serve on boards. But for those of you watching, what we need is for you to go as far as you can and as high as you can in your organization so that you can be considered for board seats. The second one is really on us as board directors. We have to ensure that diversity is on every slate that we put out in terms of our board searches. And I can tell you for the boards that I'm involved with, diversity is on every single job specification for every board seat that we fill.
Thank you, Sandy. So Mark, I'd like to move to you if I may. And as the lead independent director of 2-6, you also lead the board recruiting process. What's the role that board recruiters play in leading the way to better gender balance on boards?
Yes, well, thank you, Joanne. Look, it's important, I think, to really understand the process we go through on the board, which is to look at the skill sets of the board members we have and what we need, what's required for the company, whether it's financial background for audit, whether it's technical background because it's a highly technical company, etc. You need a wide range of skills to be able to interface and support management and also to challenge them. So when we go through a recruiting process, we actually do a self-evaluation of the board and the skill sets that we have there, and now including the diversity, both gender and ethnic diversity. And we make a list of what are our top priorities, what do we need to fill the vacancies on the board, and then we go to the recruiter. So the recruiter is sort of the hub that we have to reach out to. Even if we have known candidates, and we can talk about that at some other time, but we will always go to a recruiter to get a broader look at possible candidates for that particular position. So I learned a lot over the years as I've watched things evolve. And I remember great lists of technical specs. We did have gender diversity on there, but it wasn't the number one item that we had. And I can't say it will always ever necessarily be the number one, because you really have a limited number of seats on the board. So you have to match that. But there are definitely qualified women out there. So you depend on the recruiter to have that network in place to bring qualified and diverse candidates to you. So for the audience, if you're not familiar with the recruiters, getting right to that networking question, in the end, you may have great skills. We never see them if the recruiter doesn't bring them. So networking with board members, male and female, to understand the recruiters they went through, having them perhaps advocate for you to those recruiters, all important pieces, because the recruiters are who we go to bring a slate of potential candidates. And then from that slate, we generally work. Now, we have sent recruiters back because the slate didn't include diversity. We have. But if you're not known to that recruiter and it's the recruiter we're tied to, where we use, there's no chance you'd be on the slate. So it's just something to think about as we're trying to educate people and women who have the skill sets required but are not known. I think it's really important to know the role of the recruiter.
Thank you, Mark, for that. Are there any other words of advice for this area that might be opaque to anyone that will be opaque to anyone in the audience that hasn't actually been through the recruiting process before we move to the next question?
I think it's important. I think it's important for women to understand, getting back to Mark's question about networking, that networking has to have sort of some intention to it. And joining professional organizations, they could be for your industry, they could be for the field of, the field that you are in, and getting yourself out there. garnering attention from headhunters, getting introductions to headhunters, in addition to a broader networking approach, is going to get you on the radar screens. And I think that's what sometimes people don't make those investments in themselves. They're a bit heads down and don't understand that building their brand is supposed to be part of that holistic component of their journey to boardship.
And Joanne, the other thing I would add is that much like you want to make sure you have a good sponsor within your corporation who's advocating for you all the time, you want to make sure that you have sponsors in the community and sponsors, throughout your network. They're going to be advocating for you. And candidly, there's probably no better sponsor you could have than your own CEO, because CEOs are calling each other to look for various board candidates. Okay, and the doors have opened now for individuals lower down in the organization to be able to join boards. So letting your CEO know that you really would like to get on the board, and just expressing that to not only the CEO, but also people in your network to sponsor for you, to advocate for you, is really important.
And Joanne, if I could just take a quick example of that. I had a friend who was on the board of the DFW airport, which is a really important board in the Dallas area where I live. And she was interested in going on a board. And I said, well, did you tell the mayor? And the mayor of Dallas at that time was very involved in the community, business community. So he had a lot of business connections. So there's one where that's technically a nonprofit board, a very important one, where, again, there was a lot of connections that she could make right there and then to make sure that she was seen as a candidate for boards.
And one other point you just mentioned, I mean, you get on nonprofit boards I live in Pittsburgh. There's a lot of nonprofit boards, and that'll get you some really great experience to prepare yourself to understand governance, to put yourself in a better position to get on a public company board.
Great tips from all of you. And Steve, since you were the last to speak, let me ask you another question, if I may. I know that you see inside many companies in your role at E&Y. What would you encourage both companies and the women who work there to do more of?
So on the company front, I want to come back to what Sandra said, and that is pipeline, and then accountability on that pipeline. So, when I started at Ernst & Winnie years ago, we had an incoming class of 24 audit professionals, and, there were 20 of those were male. Now we have, a healthy balance of 12 and 12, but then you need to make sure that those individuals are matriculating up. And as you move up in the organization, as Sandra was talking about, you need to make sure you've got accountability. And so when I was leading various business units at EY, not only was I gold on my financial goals, I was also gold on how well I was doing with diversity, equity, inclusion. The other thing I would say within organizations is it's just as important to hear from the CHRO as it is from the CFO in today's environment. The CFO, is concerned about the health and welfare of the financial statements. Boards and executive management needs to be hearing about the health and welfare and how the company's progressing overall, from the human capital perspective. And you talked about human capital as being a key area, moving forward. So that's in the company perspective. On the individual perspective, I think, for some of the women, they might be surprised, and Sandra and Mark and Barbara know this, that, CEOs, one of the things that boards afford them is a coach. So I think having a coach and, coaching you and looking at your strengths, your weaknesses, and where you need to start to pivot. We've talked about, making sure that you've got a sponsor. I would also challenge the women to listen in to try to get as much diverse experience in their organization as possible, from a geographic, a functional, and a sector perspective, because boards want diversity of thought, and the more diverse background you have, the better position you're going to be in. Satya Nadella talks about, we don't want know-it-alls, we want learn-it-alls. So being able to demonstrate that you have a great learning aptitude, not just with what you've accomplished with your degrees, but with badges and certificates, and you're learning new skills. And then finally, just making sure that you demonstrate you have board experience. And so once again, there's hundreds of organizations in Pittsburgh that are looking for great board members, nonprofit. Get on those boards and learn about governance.
Those are great tips and great advice about the things that we should do and continue doing. I'd like to hear from others, Sandy, Barbara, Mark.
So Steve, I totally agree with you. I think the way to look at it too, from the board perspective, is you need to be able to have credibility, right? On the board, you're dealing with very senior, very experienced execs in management. So as a board member, and the board wants to have credible members, and that's experience that you bring, a breadth of experience, depth of experience, education. It's all part of it. And it's not, whether or not you're male or female, that's true across the board.
Well, I would also add that I'm a bit of a purple unicorn. So I'm a female, and I'm a female of color. And I think it's really important for women in general, but particularly women of color, that understanding the path and building allies, gaining allyship and mentors, and some of the examples that have been shared are really key. But I also think it's really an ally can help you with sort of the secret decoder ring, to think about board service in a way that just hasn't been common for people of color, and understanding how you may have to network differently, and how your network and the obstacles that you may face, and challenges, and getting your pitch, and understanding whom to talk to about what. I think a coach is an extraordinarily important idea. And I know we're going to talk later more definitively about networking, but I think it is something that can be very intimidating, because you definitely feel your otherness. And I think it's really important to understand that the value and lens that you can bring to a board, that may be reflective of both their customers and their stakeholders, has value. And it shouldn't stop you from embarking on this journey. It may be a slightly more difficult journey, but one that I can attest to, with the appropriate sort of strategies and sort of doggedness, you can definitely achieve the goal.
Thank you, Barbara. Sandy, did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
Well, I know we're going to talk about value proposition, but I think it's really important that everyone on this call understand that you need to be able to articulate your value proposition, and you need to realize that it may be articulated differently depending on your audience. And again, the skills that we're looking for are going to be big and strategic skills. But at the same time, one of the reasons I'm sitting on the American Electric Power Board is because I ran a company that was in the solar cell industry. So that solar industry experience and renewable energy industry experience was very applicable to what they were looking for in a board member. So you never know what it is, but again, being able to articulate your value proposition in general, but then also in specifics to a company that you will be interviewing for their board, are very, very important.
Great. And we will be looking at networking a little bit more later. And we've already segued into networking. So let's delve into that a little bit more right now. And, Sandy, I'm going to address this question to you. In the past, networks have sometimes worked against us when there was a candidate for a board position that was already known to other board members, and it was the inside circle of acquaintances that were brought to the fore as the candidates. What do you recommend that your boards do to find and select diverse board candidates outside the board members' own immediate and pre-existing networks?
Well, I think one of the most important things is to realize that still does go on, that we do tap the networks of our fellow board members. And so knowing people on the board is very, very important. Outside of that, Mark talked earlier about the relationships with search firms. And what I have sometimes found that we as women do is that our lives are very hectic. We usually have big jobs and many times have big lives outside with our families. And so when a recruiter calls, we don't have time to return the call, or we don't take the time to return the call. And that is a big mistake if you want to be on a board. Again, diverse candidates, a lot of them are coming through search firms and also are being vetted by search firms. So when that recruiter calls you in your career, it's very, very important that you answer that call. And even if you don't want that job at that time, that you give that person some ideas for other candidates. Because when it comes time to get on a board, there's certain people inside the top 5 search firms who only do board search, but you're going to need an introduction to them. And if you have relationships with other recruiters inside that same firm, you'll be able to get those introductions over to them. So again, what really needs to happen is more networking to executive search firms. And that includes boutique search firms. Again, the reason I sit on the boards that I sit on, Interface Biologics and Ripple Therapeutics, which is up in Canada, is because they needed a specific chemicals industry experience. And these are private boards. So again, this was all through a boutique search firm. So it's not just the big 5 firms that many of you may be familiar with, but it's also making sure that you have relationships where possible with boutique search firms.
Yeah,
Great,
Sandra,
Sandra.
if I could just, so I do have some experience, Joanne, with having a known candidate that the board had some experience with, but we always go through a search. And the reason is because we don't want to get in that trap of not broadening our search enough, casting a wide enough net to get the best candidate we can. So that's exactly what we've done in the past. And I agree with you on the boutique search firms as well. I remember one search we were doing, and we had engaged a search firm, and we got unsolicited. A boutique search firm brought us some candidates, some excellent candidates, actually, that we actually put in the mix. So, yeah, it's the way.
And the other thing I would say is once you have, and I know we're going to talk about value proposition, but once you really fully comprehend your true value proposition, you can do some homework as to where do you think you could provide the greatest value to what companies out there. And then with your organization, you're probably working with a large accounting firm, large law firms that have the reach that could get your bio over to that non-gov chair, over to that board. Okay, so you can be proactive in this process too.
I also have seen, I just like to mention that if you're not selected on a particular search, some of the women that have been on the list, they tend to withdraw. They begin to doubt their ability to be selected. And so my comment to you is don't give up, because you may not have been the right fit for that board. That's just it. You may be terrific, but just not the right fit for what they needed. So the other aspect to it is, be persistent. Maybe get some coaching from the recruiter as to why he views you weren't selected and somebody else, whoever it was selected.
Well, Mark,
I think that's great advice. Board searches are not for the faint of heart in terms of the interview process. So, and I think that's very practical advice, Mark.
And that's great coaching advice from both of you, Sandy and Mark. So Barbara, let me ask you, if I may, when you are coaching executives who aspire to be on boards, what strategies or programs do you advise them to consider to expand their network?
Sure. I mean, I think, as I mentioned before, is that you must be intentional. And as Sandra mentioned, often I think women, juggle so many things that, and I don't know that we're socialized to think about board service. It is really this push that we've seen over the past decade gain momentum to get women on boards and to follow this path and to identify the journey. It's not something that was common, but I want people to understand that most people want to help you. And so part of my coaching strategy has been getting them to sort of understand networking and what that network should include. It should include your business colleagues. It can include people you go to church with, a friend, college alumni, even high school. The current board, one of the current boards that I'm on, it was a colleague, a former classmate from high school. That's how far back I went in trying to understand opportunities that might be available to me for board service. And of course, as I mentioned before, joining leadership groups, industry or peer groups that can spotlight your expertise. But I also work with women so that they can actually get a succinct pitch pulled together, talking about the value they can bring to boards and getting them to feel comfortable about approaching people and working on their timing and being able to interact with people to share and really call out the degree of interest that they have. Sometimes it's as simplistic as they don't even have a social media presence. Often headhunters will do passive searches for candidates who have skill sets that boards are looking for. So making sure that you have a fulsome LinkedIn profile, for example. People that are participating in this panel, I often challenge people after this panel, did you connect with people that you saw or engaged with, or asked for folks to talk about specifically their journey or partner with you? And I think it's not, again, it's not for the shy, and it's certainly about being intentional. And I think coaching is really sort of facing and being able to develop your skills, articulate what your skills are, and then sort of manifest that in the network that you probably already have and you're not really exploiting.
Well, with that, let's move on to a topic we've already broached in a couple of your comments, a few of your comments on knowing our value proposition. And Steve, if I may start with you, we know that boards seek candidates based on value-added expertise. How should aspiring board members think about articulating the value proposition?
So Mark talked about, relative in the non-gov or the full board, we're looking at what skills they're particularly looking for. I think first and foremost, it's important. You're not applying for an executive position at the company. Okay. You're applying for a board seat. All right. So first and foremost, it's really important to understand how do boards operate? And so, they have a primary function of strategy, so not just where the company is today, but where is it going into the future? Risk management. And it used to be just succession planning. Now that has morphed into a broader oversight of human capital, non-governance and overall governance, compensation, and incentivization of executives. And then your audit committee. So are you a qualified financial expert? So, within that construct at a macro level, what skills can you bring to that particular organization? And then if you are selected for an interview, you have to immerse yourself specifically into, the company. They're looking at their 10K, their Qs, their proxy, their sustainability report. And then looking at that, where the company is today and where it's going into the future, what skills can you bring, to the table uniquely? What is your true value proposition? So as you engage with that company, you can articulate the value that you can bring. And one last point on that is that, when Mark and other board members do searches for CEOs, the first and last box they check is culture. So you want to make sure too, you're looking at the purpose and the values of that organization, and you're making sure that you can be a very good cultural fit on that board and with that management team above and beyond the skill sets that you bring.
Steve, great comments. I can tell you, in all my interviews for new board members, one of the first things that I'm really probing to see is how much homework do they do? I've already read the resume. What homework did they do? What effort did they make to really understand the company, what we stand for, what we do? And you'd be surprised the number of candidates that fall so far short because they haven't taken the time to really get into the facts and show they have a real interest besides just wanting to be on a board. They really want to be on this board. So,
two questions I always ask when I have a board interview is, can you describe the culture of your company, and can you describe the culture of your board? Because those are two different things.
And so, Sandy, let's stay with you. So we've done our self-assessment. We think we know what our skills and abilities are. We are articulating our value proposition. What if we're in a functional role, let's say a CHRO, and we don't have P&L experience? Can we ever hope to be considered for board service?
Yes, with a realistic outlook on the process. So the good news is in the last year, the aperture for candidates of a functional background has opened up very much more widely than it ever has before. So this means that functional C-suite leaders have more of a chance to get a board seat, but you've got to be able to know how to articulate your value. The boards that I'm on, just in the last 12 months, we have put on a CHRO, a supply chain leader, a digital leader, and a senior vice president of operations. Again, all functional leaders. But one thing we were able to ascertain from each of them is that they're a business partner, that they're a strategic business partner, and they're able to demonstrate that during the interview. And so again, that I would underline that as the number one item. If you're a functional leader, yes, there's absolutely an opportunity now, more so than before, to get a seat on the board. But you've got to be able to articulate the value proposition you bring as a business partner.
Okay. Barbara, can I ask you a bit of a sensitive question? What would you say to a qualified white male board candidate who is otherwise well qualified, knows his value proposition, but is passed over because of his gender and race?
Well, I think first of all, there's little evidence to show that reverse discrimination exists in any measurable percentage. And I think Betsy's earlier slides show that current board compositions just simply don't reflect that. I think of this more of sort of an equity question. And I think the goal is that boards are seeking qualified candidates. And if women represent 50% of the population, then I don't think it's a inappropriate ask or goal that the board should be reflective of that. And I also think, with most men, it's not a zero-sum relationship, meaning if things get better for women, it doesn't necessarily mean they're going to get worse for men. And whether it's their daughter, their spouse, their niece, they should all be afforded the same opportunity to serve. And so I think to some degree, we live in really polarized times. And I think people often will lean into sort of that zero-sum game proposition. And I really think that it's just an inappropriate, and it doesn't even make good business sense at this point. And it's about hiring the qualified candidate, and equity means equal opportunity. And that's really what 50-50 Women on Boards is sort of pursuing, the opportunity for women, to serve on boards and to add value to organizations. So that's typically what my response is. Not a short discussion normally, but that's what I lead with.
Thank you, Barbara. Anyone like to add to that before I move to another question for Mark? Well, then let me ask you, Mark, what is your perspective on a candidate's value proposition, given that you serve on the board of a science-driven tech company? What are the special value adds that candidates need to bring there?
Well, an individual candidate, look, it's not about them in isolation, right? So the value proposition has to be complementary to what the board needs. I mean, I'll come back to that. So yes, we do, for instance, in our company, we need some people with a good technical background that will understand the business. So you can challenge management, so you can support management and grow the company strategically. But if you have, for instance, an entire board of only technical people, then you miss out on one of the biggest areas that really makes the company function. It's the human capital. So we need people that have human capital background, human resource management. We need financial experts. I'm not a financial expert, but I depend on the financial experts on our board to do their job. I can read all the financial statements and understand them, but I really want true financial experts there for those issues. When it comes to human capital issues, you have a broad range of experience. So it's not just a one-off. Even though we're a high-tech company, we're a high-tech company that is that way because we have a high-tech workforce, yes, but they're people. When we have 23,000 employees around the world, you have to understand them culturally, their needs, their skills, how you motivate them. And the board has to be in a position to see how management is executing that effectively and coach or advise, etc. So you need a range of people. So even being in a high-tech company doesn't mean I wouldn't want all technical people on the board. There are too many aspects to running a company, and one of your biggest stakeholders are your employees. So,
Well said, Mark. And we're closing in on the top of the hour, but I've been told by the organizers that if we want to extend this session, they'll give us another 10 minutes. But I want to ask the panel if you are free to stay on for another 10 minutes before we take them up on that offer.
I am. We actually started 10 minutes late. So,
well, we've been given them to take at this time. So that's wonderful. Thank you.
I just want to echo something that Sandra talked about and Mark. I mean, so if you have deep, like I'm a financial expert, I have a big audit background, finance background. If I'm being interviewed for a board seat, there's probably not going to be a lot of questions around that because they're going to assume I've got that locked down. Okay. The questions are going to be around my business acumen and do I have a broader, can I think, broader and can I bring a diverse point of view? So, as you go into those interviews and as you engage, they're going to assume that your technical background is rock solid. It's the other areas they're going to be probing on.
I think that is so important. And I think this past 18 months, that's even more, the criticality of that premise has played out. So on the boards I serve, and I'm sure on the boards that the other panelists serve, COVID presented a series of dilemmas and uncertainty that really challenged everyone on the board to be able to support their organizations. And so all of us found ourselves really digging deep in all of our various business experiences to allow our organizations that we serve weather the storm. I think also adding in the impacts of George Floyd and Me Too, Time's Up. I think all of those skill sets that people can bring to the table, whether it be around human capital, DEI, crisis management, all of those things were necessary and needed. And I think it actually, in some ways, some companies may be more open to looking for different skill sets and experiences than perhaps they have been in the past.
Yeah, so I'll actually, echo that too, because I want to point to Patricia Hatter, who's one of our board members on 2-6. I think she's going to be coaching one of these sessions, breakout sessions. But she and I had a long conversation about a week and a half ago on what's happened with COVID and, what it's doing to the workforce with remote working, et cetera. So, offline, the board talks about those things, and you need to have somebody on the board that you can reach out to also that understands it. So Patty, who's very engaged in that in Silicon Valley, she had a very good perspective and really educated me on what's going on right now in the workforce as she sees it. So, boards do that. So again, it's not one size fits all. You need boards operate that way in the background. And so when they look for somebody, they're looking for somebody that can operate that way, bring the best to the board.
And Mark, what you just brought up is one advantage that I'm not sure we've even talked about. If you're still currently gainfully employed, which I'm betting everybody on this call is, in terms of this webcast is, boards are really looking for people who are still currently employed and also starting to think about younger age demographics. So that relevancy, Mark, that Patty was able to bring to you is because she's still in the game. It doesn't mean that people like me or Mark, I'm guessing you're retired, not that we're not ever going to get interviews again, but right now there's an advantage, I think, for people who are very gainfully employed, ranking very high in their organizations. And again, a younger age demographic. We're not talking 23 years old, but we're also not talking about 65 or over.
Right.
Well, Sandy, you've done a great job of pivoting us to the final area of concentration for us today, which is expanding perspectives. And Barbara, I'd like to ask you a question. We know that the pandemic, we talked about the pandemic earlier, but we know that the pandemic has caused more women than men to leave the workplace. Do you think that an employment gap for women will negatively impact women's board candidacy prospects? And if so, what can we do?
Well, I mean, I think it's sort of a dual-edged sword in a way, because I think it impacts the pipeline. I think disproportionately the women that may be making some choices are those that are kind of caught in that hard spot of can't find childcare, or seeking remote work and more flexibility, and can't find it with their employer. So I think ultimately it can impact the pipeline that we're hoping we're building for women to move into more senior roles in their organizations. But I think the focus on DEI is actually driving momentum. I've never had more people ask me about my board journey. I've never been asked to participate in more events, such as the one we're on tonight, than I have in the past 2 years. I think there is a bit of a call to action in the sense that organizations have to understand that sort of one size doesn't fit all. The benefit, if there's one benefit I can point to about the pandemic, is that we've proven the efficacy of remote work. Companies who are reluctant to allow women, for example, who want more flexibility and had to make tough choices about having different balance, work-life balance in their life, it's sort of indisputable right now because we survived nearly 20 months with many people working remotely. And so I'm hoping that will allow organizations to be more open-minded to flexibility and not let that harm someone's trajectory or ambition or space in the organization to succeed, because it's clear now that having flexible work schedules and allowing people to have different sort of sequencing in that labor market, it's going to benefit organizations. And I think the competition for talented women is even greater than before. So it is prompting organizations to be different and to offer different options. And for women of younger demographics, they're looking at companies who can illustrate that there are women leaderships, that can illustrate their commitment to diversity, that can illustrate that there's opportunity and growth and flexibility. So all those factors are, I think, driving, I'm optimistic to some better outcomes for a more diverse workforce and labor market.
And Mark, if I can shift to you, you're the chair of the ESG committee of the board, where diversity and inclusion is a topic of serious discussion. What governance practices are you seeing put into place that help elevate women to leadership roles and consideration for board service?
Well, are you talking about internal or external factors? And clearly, there's a lot of things we do internally. Externally, I can definitely tell you the focus is there. We just had our shareholder meeting today, but leading up to that, I can tell you I was involved in conversations with some of our investors that specifically wanted to talk to board members about women, diversity on our board, strategy going forward, et cetera. So, I mean, it's up front and center that you see some of our largest investors have made very strong commitments to not supporting candidates. For instance, the governance and nom chair, for companies that don't have at least 2 women on the board. That's one small step, but there is a great push from the outside. I would say also the board. I mean, our CEO, now chairman, Chuck Matera, he had the great push for us to change from governance and nom to ESG a couple of years back, and we have embraced that and really see the value in it. It's sent good, really strong messages to our workforce that we are broader than just trying to manage, somebody said, succession of the CEO. We're looking at the entire succession plan for the company, looking at how we do support diversity. So I think it's a very powerful message. It's something that you see companies have learned recently, right? More so. I mean, it wasn't there 10 years ago at the same level. So I really think that's positive. And I think it's driven by investors. And we always, as board members, have to remember, who do we serve? Who do we represent? Independent board members represent all the stakeholders, but particularly the investors. So what I find is that the investors are helping, educate boards that this is really important. And companies that embrace it early and have good programs, I think, are very successful and very well received, and actually will see growth in their investor ranks. So it's a win-win for everybody.
Joanne, do you have time for me to comment on something I would like to?
Absolutely.
Yeah, so I want to comment, pretty much what Mark said, and Barbara, you talked about this momentum, okay? And so if anyone have had the opportunity to see the Spencer Stewart Board Index, I just want to read a couple sentences out of here relative to the momentum that they see. And so U.S. corporate boards have been reshaping their composition in recent years, adding new skills and perspectives. In the past several years, increasing gender diversity was a top priority, but more recently, we've seen a growing focus on enhancing the racial, ethnic diversity of the boardroom. The focus on diversity is likely to continue. Our survey of nominating and governance chairs found that adding racial, ethnic diversity will be a recruiting priority for the next several years, as bringing on directors with global perspective and corporate experience, including technology and finance, will continue. And I think, the thing that Sandra talked about earlier is that now, paradigm has been broken where historically, if you weren't a CEO, if you weren't a CFO, you didn't have significant public company experience, you were kind of out of the game. But now individuals who are, have significant experience in public companies, are great candidates for these board seats. And they're clearly, what Mark talked about, we're seeing at the Center for Board Members at EY, a greater remit in the nom-gov taking on ESG or the comp committee, and it fully getting integrated to the board agenda. So there's huge opportunity moving forward.
Thank you, Steve, for that. And we're near the end of our time. We don't even have time for a lightning round, but do you have a last word for us? Sandy, do you have a last word for us?
The diversity window is open. Help you get through it.
Mark.
No, I think this is great. I would tell, if I had one last word, is don't be discouraged. Continue on your quest.
Persistent.
Do not be discouraged by little setbacks. We only learn from them.
Yeah, persistence. You got to be persistent.
Persistence.
And I would say be intentional.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, authentic and intentional. Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for all of those words. Barbara, Sandy, Mark, Steve, that was phenomenal. We can't wait to follow up with you in our breakout rooms. Now, Masha, it's over to you.
Thank you for all of your amazing insights. It's now time to move into your breakout rooms. Please look over to the left side of your screen and click on Agenda. This is how you will access the link to your Zoom breakout room. On your agenda, you will see your breakout room. Click into the session and then click Join Now. If you have any issues accessing your breakout room, please go to the Help Center, which is located to the left of your screen, or email events@5050wob.com. On behalf of Joanne, Amy, and Jamie, thank you so much for your participating, and we hope that you join us next year.